medicine, in ecology, and in traditional Chinese medicine, we think of things in sort of complex systems ways, and that many ingredients interact, and that health, whether it's of a plant ecosystem or a human ecosystem, emerges out of that complexity. And so this panel today is going to really start to bring that framework of complexity to integrative health perspective. And we're going to be learning about conceptual frameworks for how we think about complexity. We're going to be hearing about some quantitative tools, including from people who've developed some really leading edge markers for complexity, and also some of the applications to clinical care. So our lead panel speaker today is a very distinguished Professor C.K. Peng. Professor Peng, who's also a friend and a colleague, is a physicist specializing in statistical physics, complex system science, and nonlinear dynamics. And he's committed to interdisciplinary research, making significant contributions in both the fields of physics and biomedical research. But I also, as you will hear from he and his colleagues, he's very interested in that bridge between biomedical research and traditional East Asian medicine research as well. He served as a founding director for the Center for Dynamical Biomarkers at BIDMC, is co-founder of PhysioNet, which is supported by the NIH, and also served as the founding dean of the College of Health Sciences and Technology at National Central University in Taiwan. He's published over 280 papers, which have been cited more than 73,000 times. And he's also now the distinguished Yangtze professor at Southeast University in Nanjing. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Peng.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be back. I've been faculty at Harvard for over 30 years. So this is the first time giving a talk as an outsider. But I've been working with Peter, Andrew, and Gloria for many years. So it's really happy to see all the old faces here. Okay, so I'm going to present, because the Osher Center is a place, a really melting pot for many different culture, different discipline. So I'm bringing a viewpoint from a physics point of view. So I'm gonna take a dive into the very fundamental principle of how we understand health and disease. Okay, so the first thing is the definition of health. In order to understand health and disease, is actually, when I first got into this biomedical research field, it's very strange to me that as a physicist, we always need to define the problem we are studying. And then I found out in medical research, we define a lot of disease, but never have a well clear definition for health. And I think the health can be defined based on the fundamental theory of biology. So that's the theory of evolution, because under biology, you have the theory of physics, Newton's law, Maxwell's formula. But once you have a biological system, then a new theory emerges, which is a theory of evolution. And in order to define health, we have to think about the human body as a complex system. And the system is evolved in a very long process to adapt to the environment, to adapt to all the challenge. So health should be defined as the complex system's ability to adapt. Okay, so a healthy system will have a better adaptability compared to the disease system. So that would be our definition of health, and we need to use this definition to come up with a quantitative measure of the overall health of the system. And to measure this adaptability can be a good quantitative index for health. And so in the next few minutes, I will introduce our way of defining a quantitative measurement for this adaptability. Okay, so we think about the human body as a complex system. We have a lot of input that it's very difficult to control the input unless you're in a very constrained lab environment with a guinea pig. For humans, it's really difficult to control the input element. And the system also generates a lot of signal. So we will focus on the signal. We don't want to control the input. We just want to look at the output created by this system and trying to figure out whether the system is healthy or not based on how adapt the system can be. Okay, so we focus on this output, especially the dynamic pattern of the output, because the dynamics actually tell you how the system can adapt to the environment. It's not a static molecular component that tell you how. It's actually the dynamics of the system. So instead of looking at the traditional output, we look at the time series. And this is closely related to a lot of research here probably have studied like heart rate variability. That's why the variability is very important to help us to understand a system's health. So for heart rate time series, always the most accurate measurement is from the ECG. So you measure the beat and you measure the interbeat interval, and then you can convert the interbeat interval to instantaneous heart rate. Okay, from one heartbeat to the next, how fast the heart is beating. And so here is a famous example I use. There are 4 subjects with a 30 minutes recording, roughly about 2,000 heartbeat, and there's an instantaneous heart rate. And we picked those 4 subjects to have roughly about the same average heart rate, which is about 60 beats per minute. There's only 1 subject that is healthy. 3 actually has severe disease. Usually, if I have more time, I will ask people to pick which one do you think is healthy. Since I don't have time right now, so we will give us the answer. So case A is a congestive heart failure patient. This is actually the one when I ask cardiology, they all like patient A as a healthy case because they think the heart is a metronome, just pumping without any interaction to the other part of your body. Case C is also a congestive heart failure. And from this, we conclude, of course, based on many other examples, we conclude overly regular, a very regular or older pattern generated by a human body indicates the human body is in a disease state. It's not a very highly adaptive state. Okay, and for B and D are very irregular, but actually D is an atrial fibrillation subject, and this means that if you have an irregular disorder output from the system, if it's too irregular, too disorder, it's also not good. Okay, so overly irregular is also not healthy. And so healthy case is B. And our conclusion is health is balanced between extreme order and balance between the extreme order and extreme disorder. So it's in the middle. And this is actually very consistent with the traditional Chinese medicine concept. Okay. And you can think about this if you the first time you pick the wrong answer, you can think about this as it's a 4-piece of music. Which one would you prefer to listen to? Okay. I think if you still like A and C, you need to go to psychiatric department, make an appointment. And case D is very irregular, so it's very too excited for people. It's Also in physics, we call it white noise. So white noise make your brain actually go nuts. Okay, so B is actually the healthy case. And the overall theory is very simple. So we believe a healthy system generate very complex dynamics of the output signal. And this complex signal will degrade it with disease. So one degradation is become too older. The other degradation is become too disorder. And this lead to the system generating a what we call low complexity signal. Of course, we need to define the complexity quantitatively. And so that's the overall scheme. And here's an example of a famous Taiwanese artist for the Chinese painting. This is before he got Alzheimer. And this is after he got it. And as the disease become more severe, as you can see, originally we're not talking about the detail of the painting. We just say the structure of the painting. Initially become very older, and then it become very disorder. So this is actually not just for our body, it's also for our mind. The mind is actually also in the between a good balance between order and disorder. So we want to define a complexity measurement that have this kind of property. The complexity should go like an invert U shape. Is in the middle is the highest balance between order and disorder, and on the two extreme, they are the lowest. And so I invented an algorithm called multi-scale entropy measurement. The concept is that the systems generate this kind of very complex outcome, dynamic signal, and we can measure the information content of the signal. The higher the information content means that the system is much more likely to adapt to environment because you have the more information. So when the environment change, you can use the useful information to adapt to the environment. And this total amount of information can be measured with the algorithm called multi-scale entropy, so MSE. And this is the actual data from real subject. So there's three groups. Healthy group in the middle has the highest complexity. It's a balance between order and disorder. The green is the green data point. And for the congestive heart failure, you have a higher order and lower complexity. For the atrial fibrillation group, you have a higher disorder and lower complexity. And what is really important is on the x-axis and y-axis, the horizontal and the vertical axis, both are measurable numbers. So if you give me a time series, a signal, I can give you this two number. Okay, for each time series, I can give you the x coordinate and y coordinate. And when you measure different subjects, you will find out it falls into a very well-defined curve. And the healthy system is on the top. So once I look at many of this kind of signal generated by the human body, then I come up with two fundamental principles. The first principle is the healthy state have the highest complexity. So this is a principle based on the horizontal axis. So the higher the value, the better, okay? And the second principle is the system had to balance between these two extremes in order to achieve the highest complexity. Okay, so this is a principle on the horizontal axis. And so next, I will give you some example how this principle being applied. I will only focus on the first principle because the second principle will be described in more detail by Dr. Fan's talk in this section. He will focus on TCM treatment and how we can use this principle to understand TCM treatment. Okay. Of course, this is not just for heart rate. You can actually work on many other signals. Almost all the signal generated by human body can apply this principle. So far, I haven't seen any exception, so it's always true. For example, if we can look at continuous blood pressure, this is actually the blue and the red are two patients in the ICU. So this is an invasive blood pressure, continuous blood pressure measurement. And if you actually measure the, if you actually use this signal to analyze with the multi-scale entropy measurement, you get for blue curve, you have a higher complexity. So the curve is on the top is higher, and the red curve has a lower complexity. So one is an ICU patient, the other is an ICU patient with sepsis. Okay, so when the sepsis happens, then it's actually in the very early stage of sepsis, so this can help you to predict, not predict, early detect sepsis. And on the right is a result, the multi-scale entropy analysis of EEG signal. It's actually during the developmental from 8 to 9 years old all the way to adult. You can see the complexity. The complexity you can think about as the area under this curve. So the higher the curve, the higher complexity. So as you can see with the development, human brain, the EEG generated by the human brain become more complex, have a higher complexity. So now also with the talk yesterday by Brad Manner, Dr. Brad Manner, he worked on the posture gait data. We also have a previous study together with Peter that look at the force platform data. So this is balanced data. So you ask someone to stand, the subject to stand on the force platform for about 30 seconds and record the signal. So the signal will look like this. One is for healthy young, one is for the other is healthy elderly. It looks very complicated, but if you can use the complexity concept to measure the information content of the signal with the multi-scale entropy measurement, and then you will find that the young subject have a higher complexity than the elderly subject. Okay. So the application of the first principle is first, if you find your subject, the signal generated by your subject have a very high complexity, then you can define the subject is healthy. Okay. Then under the healthy, there's a borderline health. So this is the sub-health. We have a study of 400 subjects with metabolic syndrome. So they're not strictly defined as a disease, but they're just not as normal as they should. So with the subject with a 0, the index 0 means it's all the 5 measurement of metabolic syndrome are all normal, then it's healthy. With 1 or 2, 3 or 4 index abnormal, then the complexity actually decrease. So on the Y, sorry. Okay, that's fine. So what I plot on the Y-axis is the complexity index, which is the multi-scale entropy measurement, the area under that particular curve. Okay, so we can actually look at the subhealth. So when people become less complex, the system become less complex, we know that the system will have less adaptability, and it's a good time to intervene, trying to reverse the system back to the healthy state. And this next is the disease. That was an example we showed before. And in the disease case, there was some very interesting application. So if you find a subject that have a low complexity in the disease state, and now you give intervention to the subject, so you do some medical treatment, and then you find out that the treatment actually bring this point, right, the complexity up. Okay, that means it's a very effective treatment. Okay, you improve the subject's health. And this is actually an example. I'm going to show two examples. One is with patient with APA undergoing a surgery. Okay, this is before the surgery, the complexity is low, much lower than normal. After surgery, the complexity increase back to the normal range. Okay, and another example is actually the body weight. So this is not on the heart rate data, it's on the balance data, center pressure data. And with the Tai Chi practice, and those are patients with a peripheral neuropathy. So after, as you can see, after about 6 weeks Tai Chi training, the complexity of the system already improve. And there's also a lot of other function also improved, like 6-minute walk, staying out and go, all the tests are also improved. But sometimes you give a intervention to the patient, their complexity actually decrease. Okay, so this is a very dangerous condition because you are not really helping the patient. You probably make the system become even worse. Okay, so we have an example of a NIH famous study, CAT study, is cardiac arrhythmia suppression trial. And so they give them anti-arrhythmia drug, and the patient actually have less, lower survival rate. The patient have a more problem after the drug. So the drug actually give, take care of the symptoms of the arrhythmia decrease dramatically, but the patient die more likely. Okay, so this is the example we show. Okay. And also a very interesting concept is vitality. So if a system is damaged from a complex system point of view, if a system is damaged too much, it may not be able to survive at all. Okay, so this is, we actually found this in the ICU patient with undergoing the ECMO, ECMO, like the heart and lung support system. So the patient doing the ECMO is usually, if you don't intervene with ECMO, they have only about 10% survival rate. Okay, they are very severely damaged. But with the ECMO, the survival rate increased to about 50%. But still, there are 50% that will not survive. So we did a study to figure out, can we predict which of the 50% will not survive, which will survive? And based on the complexity concept, is if the complexity of the system is already lower than a certain threshold, then even if you provide this medical intervention, it will not help the patient because eventually the system has to heal itself. It's not the physician and the medical, the hospital is just providing an environment that makes the system easier to help it to heal itself. So if the system cannot heal itself, then it already lose the vitality, then it will not be helpful. So we actually did this ECMO study, and these two are the ICU patient. One group is a survival group, the other is a non-survival group. So when when they get into the ICU, you measure about 4 hours of the heart rate, and you do the complexity measurement, then you can figure out which of them will have a higher chance to survive with the ECMO intervention. So I give a over summary. This is actually, as you can see in my talk, there's no mechanism of the system. Then I didn't mention anything about why the system have a complexity, why is it generate this complex time series. The only assumption is the system, in order to survive, it had to have certain feature. The feature is the information content had to be high in order for them to survive. So this is from a system point of view, ignoring all the detail of the system, just saying no matter what kind of system, it can be a carbon-based system that we have in the Earth, on the Earth, or maybe an AI. Eventually might become some kind of life form. But in order for them to survive, they also have to have a high information content in order to face all the challenge. So this is system that level of perspective. And we define health as the capacity to adapt. So this is very reasonable definition. And we use the complexity, which basically means the amount of information of your system to quantify the health. And this makes it very important actually to monitor your system continuously. Okay, with the advancement of the wearable device, it's now become very easy. You can measure the continuous heart rate, your movement, blood pressure also, instead of doing measurement every day, like 3 times, you can actually measure blood flow velocity, which is closely related to the blood pressure continuously. Glucose measurement maybe every few minutes. So this all give you the dynamics. The dynamic can tell you a lot. If you're actually interested in doing research, collecting the monitor the system continuously, you can visit the left front desk because they are helping researchers to monitor the patient continuously with a wearable device. Okay. And the second principle that I didn't go into the detail, actually it's very useful to apply to the framework of traditional Chinese medicine, which is always telling us it's balance between yin and yang, between cold and hot. So the balance point of view is also very important because I tell you the system, when it's at the balance point, it's actually have the highest complexity because it's similar to in physical, we call critical phenomena. It's at the critical point that has the rich dynamics. Okay, so I will leave this topic to Dr. Fang, and I finish my talk here. Thank you.
Thank you, CK. It really sets a nice context for the next 3 speakers who are all collaborators with you. So it's going to create a nice cohesive, complex whole. So our first speaker, and I'll just do a quick bio for all of them. He is a fellow in our program, Dr. Yan Ma, who spent some time studying with Kang, has a really rich background in both traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine. and then was trained in these sort of quantitative complexity measures. She's a graduate of our Osher Fellowship, and her research focuses a lot on sleep dynamics, which I think is going to be a big part of her presentation, and the use of these complexity measures. And she's also interested in the interface of um, um, the use of technology in terms of wearable sensors and home measurements of some of these complex signals, and also the use of apps in terms of mind-body practices to help regulate these complex systems. So our second speaker is going to be Jing Fang, Dr. Jing Fang. He received his MD and PhD from Nanjing University of Chinese Medicine and completed a postdoctoral fellow here at the Harvard Medical School. He currently serves as a full-time acupuncturist in the Cleveland Clinic's Department of Wellness and Preventive Medicine. He's a clinical assistant professor of medicine at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western University. And he's also an adjunct clinical assistant professor at Ohio State Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine. And our third speaker is going to be Andrew Ahn. I think he's received some introductions before, but he is our lead of the program of high tech and soft touch at Osher. He works at the intersection of technology and traditional healing. He too has a background in physics, medicine, and integrative health, and he's the chief medical officer at LabFront, which is a digital health platform, and he focuses on making health science tools more accessible while preserving the human element in healthcare. And his research combines digital innovation with traditional healing approaches to build bridges between ancient wisdom and modern science. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Yan Ma.
Hi, everyone. My pleasure to speak today. Building upon CK's great talk, I'm going to present some examples where I used complexity-based measures for clinical and research data. So we know for many years, medicine has been greatly influenced by reductionism, and it tends to understand the human body at microscopic levels. Following the idea that a complex system, for example, our human body, can be best explained by analyzing tiny components from it and then build them up. With increasing focus on whole person health, I am interested in understanding functional complexity and their contribution to the improvement of whole person health. So here I want to take Dr. Peter Wen's work as an example. So this diagram here shows the one example of multimodal nature of Taiji. So simply speaking, in addition to understand Taiji's benefit on each individual domain, Dr. Wen proposed to understand how Taiji can influence the crosstalk between systems. So for example, his studies showed that Taiji can improve cognitive and physical function, and Taiji practice can also improve gait and balance control, which altogether improve the balance control and reduce the risk of falls. And his example also showed that the mindfulness components or the slow breathing components of Taiji can actually help to improve cardiovascular health. But meanwhile, knowing the importance of complex interventions or complex research questions, I have realized another piece that is equally important. The question that I had was, what is the best measure that we can quantify such system complexity or such system improvement under the lines of whole person health? So we need to understand the complexity of system at the dynamic complex angle. So we know, so here CK has introduced the idea of using complexity-based measures to quantify health versus disease. And we learned that complexity is a measure that quantify physiological dynamics, and it reflects the system's ability to respond or to adapt to challenges or changes in the environment. The system with higher complexity is healthier and more adaptable to physical challenges, while lower complexity is usually associated with aging or pathological conditions. So in a secondary analysis, I had ECG data from the general population where each participant had comprehensive INU checkup and continuous ECG recordings from a wearable device. So they wear the ECG monitor for a few hours during the day. I was interested in metabolic syndrome, which refers to 5 factors: abdominal obesity, hypertension, hyperglycemia, and abnormal cholesterol levels. And metabolic syndrome is defined when 3 of the 5 components present. And this is a good example where multiple systems are involved. For analysis, I grouped the participants based on the number that they have for the components. So on the left bar, you see the white bar. That shows the participant has none of them, none of the 5 risk factors. Where on the right, the black bar here shows the participant all the 5 components, which means that they were the most severe cases. So on the left panel, you see that using conventional heart rate as a measure, we don't see any significant differences among the groups. And we also applied conventional HRV analysis. We saw some group differences, but it's not good enough to distinguish the groups. Well, on the right panel, we see that using complexity-based measures, we can distinguish all the groups by significant differences. And then I used something called metabolic syndrome score. So this is an algorithm where we involve, for example, age, sex, or the severity of the risk factors. And we got a continuous variable as the metabolic syndrome score for the severity. And on the y-axis, we see the complexity index. And we saw a significant correlation between the metabolic syndrome score and the complexity index. So, so this is an example that we can see that rather than using several specific measures for each domain, each factor, we used the complexity index as a system level measure, and this can reflect pathological conditions or overall health. In a clinical trial led by Dr. Peter Wen, where all subjects were healthy older adults, we found that experienced Taiji masters had significantly higher, how do I go back? Sorry. Can I go back to the previous slide? Oh, thank you. So here, oh, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Can we go back again? Sorry. So
try pushing the button, the red one.
it doesn't work. Oh, yeah, here, got it. So here on this plot, we see the topper curve shows the Taiji masters, where the lower line shows the Taiji naive participants. So all the subjects were healthy, but we can still see the different level of the complexity. And then for Taiji naive subjects who were randomized to practice Taiji for 6 months, we saw a significant increase in some scales of the complexity. And those scales were associated with slow breathing and improved bioreflex, which suggests that Taiji practice may be beneficial in improving cardiovascular health through crosstalk through systems. And we didn't see any significant changes in the usual care control group. And now let's look at a longer time window. For example, the 24-hour blood pressure. On the left, I showed you the 24-hour recording from blood pressure. So normally we know that our blood pressure decreases 10 to 20% at night, which is called a dipping pattern. So if our blood pressure doesn't fall or even increase during the night, it presents a non-dipping or reverse dipping pattern, as I show at the lower panels. The abnormal rhythms are associated with a greater risk of target organ damage and poor cardiovascular prognosis. And currently, many wearable devices can easily record heart rate or pulse rate. I wonder whether similar day-night patterns can be observed simply from heart rate data. So from here, we can see that the heart rate also decrease at night, but such decrease also present even when the blood pressure pattern is abnormal. So I was wondering whether heart rate can be used to see some day-night patterns. So there is another study where we analyzed the data from another 3 groups. So older patients with COPD and or heart failure, and older or younger healthy adults as a control group. So in terms of the day-night pattern, so we see here, if we look at the heart rate itself, there were no significant difference among the 3 groups. So all the 3 groups showed decreased heart rate at night. And conventional HRV measure in the middle, it does show some differences between the groups, but still it was not able to distinguish the groups. But if we look at the complexity, it showed significant group differences. So the complexity level of healthy heart rate should decrease during the night, as we see in the younger group. So the idea behind that was during the night when we sleep. So it's a time that our body or our system should recover or restore the energy and vital. So we're supposed to have a lower complexity so that our body can recover. It does not need to maintain as high complexity as during the night when we were alert and we need to cope with challenges. But in the older group, although they are healthy, but we see that the diminished differences, day-night differences in the healthy older group as a non-dipping pattern in the middle. And then in the patient group, where older patients with COPD or heart failure, they have reversed dipping pattern, meaning that even at night, they have a very higher level of complexity, even higher than the day, meaning that they were suffering from some kind of like exertion, so their body cannot be fully recover from the sleep. So if we calculate the day-night differences of the complexity, we can see that there's very distinguishable patterns among the 3 groups. So now let's see an example other than heart rate. So we know that balance control is crucial for preventing falls, especially when we age. So in Dr. Wen's study, using data from center pressure recordings, we found that Tai Chi expert had more complex movement, even though their sway speed were basically the same or similar. And then if we ask the Tai Chi naive participant to do Tai Chi practice for 6 months, we see that the Tai Chi training compared to the usual control care group, they have improvement in their balance. At the end, the conventional measure of balance did not change significantly, but the complexity of their movement did increase, especially for those who practiced more. So this suggests that Tai Chi may improve balance by making movement more complex and adaptable rather than just slowing them down. So instead of the anatomic structures, we should consider the human body as a dynamic, interconnected system. So such complexity theories and research examples inspired me to revisit my question regarding how to measure health at a dynamic and system level, and whether they can be applied in integrative medicine. So later, Dr. Andrew Ang and Dr. Jing will show more examples of using complexity in TCM. And I believe we will be inspired by their talk. So thank you.
And hello, everyone. So I'm Jing, I'm practicing acupuncture at Cleveland Clinic. So I'm so excited to be here, can share my experience and thoughts with you. Today, I'd like to talk about quantifying the Asian practice in Chinese medicine. So before we dive in, let's reimagine the acupuncture. So the core of the acupuncture is about inserting the needles at a specific point, we call acupoints, and then achieve some therapeutic effects. So the Asian practitioners explain it using the qi and the meridian. So it sounds weird to our today's person, but it's very reasonable. I will explain later. So why the modern research look at the mechanism of the acupuncture, like the endorphins, the neural pathways, and the fascial network to uncover, we call the black box, so how it works. So the this logic applies not only so for the acupuncture, but also for the Chinese herbal medicine also. So what if we explore the logic in a new way? So Dr. Peng just mentioned the human body is a complex system. So when we introduce some intervention, the body responds with the feedback signals. So the signals are dynamic, nonlinear, and highly intricate. So our research focused on measuring and analyzing these dynamic physiological signals, helping us better understand the body's response to the intervention. So Dr. Peng introduced two fundamental principles of the health and disease. So the first principle shown on the vertical axis, so whether greater complexity means the better health. The second one represented by the balance point on the horizontal axis. So together, these two principles create a two-dimensional model. So interestingly, both align closely with idea in traditional Chinese medicine. So the first principle, in this model, the high complexity means the health. And also as complexity decreases, the body moves into the sub-health state. And also it drops further, it progresses to disease or even becomes life-threatening. So this aligns with the TCM concept we call the Zhen Qi. Zhen Qi, we can translate into the vital energy of upright Qi. So as in the Huangdi Jing, this is a classic text in Chinese medicine, when the Zhen Qi is strong, so external pathogens cannot invade. This is from the Huangdi Jing. And also Zhen Qi also mirrors ideas we call the dynamic complexity. Why, when it is abundant, the body remains healthy. Conversely, so when the pathogens gather, it indicates the deficiency of the Zhen Qi. So in TCM, the core principle for the treating disease is to support Zhen Qi and eliminate the pathogenic Qi. So by supporting the Zhen Qi, the balance is achieved and also the disease is cured. This is the main concept in the Chinese medicine, TCM. So here is an example to show how acupuncture can the intervention can affect the Zhen Qi. So we have the study. We selected 3 acupoints and then apply the magnetic patches on these locations. So the body's dynamic signals, we measure the center of the pressure. And before applying the magnetic patches, so the complexity level, we can see around 4. And then we apply the patches. After 2 days, we measured complexity level increased. And then we remove the patches. So 2 days without the patches, so we measure again, complexity level drop. And then we repeat, reapplying the patches and measure again, it increased. And then removed, it dropped. And then applied again, increase. Very interesting. So this is the very interesting, sorry. Yeah, this is a very interesting study. So it suggests that the stimulating acupuncture points can increase the complexity, aligned with the TCM idea, enhancing the Zhen Qi, increase the Zhen Qi. So this is research attempt to quantify the Zhen Qi, the vital energy, by using the dynamic complexity as a measurable biomarker. So the second principle is what we wanted to share more. So when the system is a balance between two extremes, the dynamics complexity is highest. So this idea is key to TCM. We all know TCM divides everything into yin and yang. So yin and yang, two parts. So yang is active, outward, warm, and bright. So yin is still inward, cold, and dark. It seems like yang is more disorder and yin is a more ordered part, okay? So in our model, yin yang are at the opposite ends of the spectrum. So we all know TCM aim to restore the balance of yin and yang. So not to push for the extremes. In practice, if the disease shows yin pattern, we try to move it towards the yang. If the disease shows a yang pattern, so we try to move the stator towards yin. This is the principle of the TCM. The goal is to reach the balance point, and the body is at its highest. The complexity, we call it healthiest. So this aligns with the second principle, which states that the balance lead to the highest dynamic complexity. So in TCM, it is further thinking. The treating disease goes beyond balancing yin and yang. If we treat everything with yin and yang, that is too simple to believe. So the treatment is very complicated. We did a lot of the different type of treatment. So the principle is a yin-yang balance yin-yang, but the practicing is beyond that. So we're using another way, another concept we call the qi transformation. So in this concept, so it involves 4 actions: ascending, descending, exiting, and entering. So the ascending and descending form one direction, that is up and down. And exiting and entering form another, in and out. So this is another 2-dimensional model. The goal is also same, the balance, restore the balance. So balance these 2 dimensions, making the diagnosis and treatment more practical. So this process in Chinese medicine, TCM, we call the qi regulation or regulating the qi. So it helps harmonize the body to restore the health. The same principle, the same phenomenon, and the same philosophy. We wanted to rebalance yin and yang, but we increase the yin-yang 1 dimension to 2 dimensions. That is qi regulating. And also, what about if we expand yin-yang concept into 3 dimensions? So we get the 6th meridian pattern differentiation. So these dimensions are called the kai he shu. Kai he shu means opening, closing, and pivoting. Opening, closing, pivoting, that makes a 3-dimensional. Each pair works as the opposites, but the goal still, we want to achieve the balance. This creates a 3-dimensional Tai Chi model, or we call the Tai Chi sphere, because it is a 3-dimension. It is the ball rather than just a round circle. So the same, when the system reaches balance, the dynamic complexity is at its highest, so representing a healthy state. So this multi-dimensional approach gives the TCM a deeper understanding of the human body and also for the practicing better. So let's talk about what we are working to quantify TCM syndrome pattern differentiation. So in TCM, the diagnosis and the treatment involve the dimensional transformations. Clinical data is seen as the high dimensional data. Each question we ask patient, how much of the pain? 0, 10. So this is 1 dimension. how frequency of the urination, how frequency of the bowel movement, okay? And also, do you feel cold, chill, or you're running hot? So each question is one dimension. So we ask a lot of questions. In Chinese medicine, we have the 10 questions poem. So everybody can maybe recite that in when we learn Chinese medicine acupuncture. So we treat all of the data from the clinical symptom as the high dimensional data. And then the human brain simplifies it into the low dimensional model with the TCM theory. So the simplified model, we call that TCM syndrome pattern differentiation. So helps guide the treatment more effectively. So our research followed a similar approach. We use the electrothermal activity measurement to collect the high dimensional data from the body's 24 meridians. And then we apply the dimension reduction analysis to create a three-dimensional 6-meridian pattern differentiation model. This model makes it easier to guide our practical and also the treatment, diagnosis for the treatment and also treatment. So since 2011, we have been researching this project, quantifying the analysis of the 6-meridian differentiation TCM and using meridian electrothermal activity measurement as the foundation. And over time, we built a meridian EDA database and creating and developed the prototype for our research also. So the next, so I want to share some cases with you that is more maybe easier to understanding how we use this analysis. So the case one is the 57-year-old female. So the main chief complaint is the pain in the hand and the wrist, along with the morning ankle pain, swelling. Her initial blood pressure was 152/75. So the diagnosis in TCM, Qi deficiency with the damp obstruction, and also we did a needle acupuncture on the Taiying and Yangming meridian, and we treat the patient with the herbal medicine, 补中益气汤, that is the herbal formula. So after 1 week, the patient's pain and swelling improved. And also the blood pressure also improved. Blood pressure, 1 week blood pressure was 127/70. And 2 weeks, it dropped further to 121/69. So we all know blood pressure is a holistic biomarker. So its improvement indicates that not only the local symptom improved, but also the holistically, the overall balance also being restored. The second case compared to the first case, a 47-year-old female with a similar pain issue, right ankle pain, irritability, and tenderness along the spleen meridian. Spleen meridian is inner side of the legs. So and also she was overweighted, and also the blood pressure, originally blood pressure was 135/81. Diagnosis TCM, Qi deficiency with the damp phlegm obstruction, similar, and also we use the 补中益气汤, the same formula as the first case. And also after treatment, we can see the ankle swelling, pain improved, but blood pressure increased to 144/81. So, and further later, 5 weeks, the patient lost 7 pounds. Patient was very satisfied. Patient liked to lose weight, but the blood pressure rose further to 155/98. So this indicates that we need to do some adjustment for the treatment. We shouldn't treat patient with the higher and higher blood pressure. We should restore the balance. We should keep the blood pressure lower or keep the same, but we shouldn't see the blood pressure increase. That is not good. So we adjust the diagnosis and the treatment plan. So the new diagnosis was the heart kidney disharmony and also the liver yang arising. So the treatment with the needling acupuncture dressed on the Taiying, Shaoyang, and Jueying. We add Shaoyang. And also the herbal medicine changed to Tianma Goutengyi. So the result is changed. The result is good. After just 1 week, the blood pressure improved to 135/97. And 2 weeks, it further dropped to 124/81. So the showing significant systematically improvement and restored balance. So here we create a 3-dimension animation to show the changes before and after treatment. That is more easier to read. So the blue dots represent the blue before the treatment. The red dots represent after treatment, and distance to the origin represents the system balance. Okay, so for the first case, the distance reduced. We can see the. Oh, here. Yeah, sorry. The distance reduced from the about 16 to 10 after treatment. So indicating the improvement of the holistically the balance. Oh, sorry. And for the case 2, okay, for the case 2, the distance increased from 9 before treatment to 23 after the first treatment. That is why the blood pressure increased, because the distance, the states moving further from the balance. It's moving out of balance from the before treatment, causing blood pressure rise. And also, we can see the local treatment, ankle swelling, the pain reduced. But overall, holistically, the balance is not good. And then adjust the treatment, we see the distance drop from the 23 back to 8. That restored the balance and also normalized the blood pressure. So this example shows that biomarkers integrate with the traditional Chinese medicine framework also can effectively diagnose and guide our treatment. And with the advanced biomarker, TCM also can achieve the quantification and precision practicing as the Western medicine. Okay, so sorry, I think I have timed out. I will wrap up my presentation here. I look forward to your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you for that talk. My title is From Fluorescent Dyes to Electrokinetics, Exploring Bioelectrical Mechanisms in Eastern Medicine. These are my conflicts of interest. I thought it would be interesting, actually, just to follow up with Dr. Fan's clinical experience, was to actually talk about a study that Peter Wayne and I published back in 2009. And this was a study that involved, actually it was a secondary analysis from a randomized controlled trial that involved Japanese-style acupuncture for endometriosis-related chronic pelvic pain in adolescent girls. And so there were 18 subjects in this small study. They had stage 1 to 3 endometriosis, and they were randomized to active acupuncture and sham acupuncture. And the acupuncturists, they used a Japanese-style acupuncture, and for every time they had a treatment, they would measure the electrical measurements on the Jing well points. These are points that are sort of on your fingers and then the toes. And that device was called the Hibiki 7 device. And they, as I mentioned, measured at 24 Jing well points before each acupuncture treatment. So they did twice a week. And the skin readings, according to this measure, had some ranges that were considered normal. So 10 to 20 was normal. Less than 10 was excessive. Over 20 was deficient. So it was kind of like the opposite. The higher the number, the more deficient that meridian was. And I actually put up this slide for the acupuncturists out there. I think there are a few New England School of Acupuncture students out there. There you go. And hopefully the acupuncturists out there will recognize the values here. So these are the 12 meridians here.
And then the values for the Hibiki measures at baseline for the 18 or so participants in this study. And you could see that basically all the meridians were normal, except for these three meridians, the spleen, liver, and kidney. I learned acupuncture, I just don't know enough about it. And so when I presented this to an acupuncture crowd, and they said, oh, that makes absolute sense, because spleen, liver, and the kidney channel goes to the uterus in the pelvic area. And so, okay, that was interesting. So they did that. And what we were interested in was to see how these measures actually changed with respect to acupuncture treatment. So obviously, this was a randomized controlled trial, and one group got true or verum acupuncture, and the other one got a sham acupuncture treatment. And we wanted to see how these values sort of changed over time. And so on the left is the sham treatment. And you could see that the values were all over the place. It was quite dynamic from week to week. But then with the true acupuncture treatments, we saw that the values started to normalize, basically normal values being between 10 to 20. So there was some correlation, at least in terms of the treatment designation they got and these electrical measures. And then we also wanted to see, did these sort of balances in these values correlate with clinical symptoms? And as Dr. Fan had mentioned, there's a number of ways that you can measure sort of asymmetry. There's yin and yang asymmetry, and yin is basically more sort of anterior in the body, yang is posterior. Then you could also do sort of top-bottom measures and left-right measure asymmetry. And we found that at least for a number of measures for pelvic pain, endometriosis quality of life studies measures, that after a sort of linear, multiple linear regression, that these asymmetries did correlate with symptoms even above and beyond just the treatment designation. And so that was of interest as well. And what's interesting, at least from this perspective, is that this talks about balance from a spatial perspective. So basically a balance of these electrical measures within the body spatially. What Ivy and CK had talked about was the balance from a time perspective. You take the time series, and then you evaluate the balance of order versus disorder. And then the state of balance is where you have the highest complexity. So it's of interest to me and of us in the future to figure out, like, in what ways are these two related? How does the spatial complexity and the temporal complexity relate to each other, or the balances, I should say? And one of the things I was really interested in was that, I learned acupuncture, and I learned a particular type of acupuncture called Kiko Matsumoto style, a Japanese style of acupuncture. And they use a lot of different interventions, obviously needles, pressure, but they applied electrical stimulation, heat, magnets, as Dr. Fan had mentioned, these diodes, there's some interesting devices, laser, sound. So just a lot of these things that, from a conventional medical doctor point of view, you would say, how the heck is this working? Magnets, for instance, if you apply it, these are small magnets that most people, after wearing it for even after a second or two, you're not going to feel it. And somehow it's not going to stimulate the nervous system. And yet we're seeing some anecdotal, evidence, as Dr. Fan had showed himself, that having some systemic effects. And so I was really curious at the time to figure out what is the physiological mechanism behind this all. Now, there's a famous Japanese acupuncturist by the name of Yoshio Manoka, who had this belief that acupuncture was accessing this signaling system that has yet to be discovered by conventional medicine. And he called this the X signal system. And it is the system at the heart of acupuncture theory. And he thought that that primitive signal system in the body that it is the primitive system in the body that has embryological roots, but masked by more advanced and complex control systems. Basically, these were found in more primitive organisms that don't have a mature nervous system, for instance, but yet they're able to do, a lot of sort of important tasks. He also felt the system was able to detect and discriminate internal external changes, that it cannot be explained by neurophysiology because it is manipulated clinically with minute stimuli, just like magnets, that cannot be clearly said to affect the nervous system. It manifests and through certain acupoints that are topologically related, structurally, functionally, and biorhythmically, and has some holographic principles appear to play some part in this signal system. And what he means by that is it has a lot of interesting relationships with each other. Like, for instance, the fire points in one meridian could be related to a fire point on another meridian. And also this idea of this fractal relationship where you have representations of the body on segments of your body, like your whole ear. Your ear represents your whole body, or even reflexology of your foot. There are representations of your body. And so in order to figure out what exactly is happening here and to sort of explain the inexplainable, I really wanted to understand sort of the studies that evaluated meridians and points before. And I think there are 3 areas of study that I would say had substantial enough, or at least enough data to say that there's something there. The first is the correlation between acupuncture points and meridians and connective tissue planes. This was published by Hélène Langevin, who is now the director of NCCIH. She was also the former director at Osher here. And what she did was she took a cadaver arm model and then sort of overlaid the meridians and points, and then took a look at the cross section and to see where these points and meridians sort of aligned with certain anatomical structure. And you could kind of see this goes from the elbow to the shoulder from 0 to 12. And I think a good example of this is at number 5 here. You can see the 3 muscles. Well, you can see first off the meridians and then the points with these double circles. And then you see the one, basically 3 muscles, the biceps, the brachioradialis, and the triceps. And you can see where the meridians and points overlie. A lot of them are over the fascial planes between the muscles. So for instance, I think this is lung is between the biceps and the brachioradialis, large intestines is between the brachioradialis and the triceps, and the sanjiao is between the 2 of the 3 heads of the triceps. And she found that there was statistical significantly relationships there. So that's one sort of evidence that we had to take a look at. The other interesting sort of finding at these acupuncture points were their electrical properties. And I think acupuncturists use these devices, some believe in them, some don't, but basically, the idea is you have these devices that could help locate points. And the mechanisms behind that is that these points have high electrical conductivity, low resistance, higher capacity or capacitance. And basically once these, you put these device over a skin, and as it sort of hits a point, it goes, woo, like it sort of shows some sound. I actually did a systematic review and said, that probably needs a little more work, as most systematic reviews concludes with, but said that there was, enough evidence here to say that there's something worth looking for. And then the third type of study for acupuncture was the type of studies that involved nuclear tracer dyes. And these were studies that were done in 1970s and 1990s, where they injected nuclear dye in the skin. And basically they did this very shallowly, it's like a PPD shot, it's an intradermal shot. They didn't go in the subcutaneous fat. They injected these dye in these low electrical resistance points. So they didn't rely on acupuncturists to identify these points. They actually used these devices to identify these points. And when they injected the dye in these points, they could see that the dye would sort of migrate up and possibly follow some kind of path that looked like a meridian. And interestingly, these studies were done in multiple locations. This was done first in France, Romania, China, and Spain. And all of them found that correlation, interestingly, that there was these pathways of nuclear dye migrations that correlated with meridians. And I wanted to show you a little bit of this study. This was done by Kovacs in 1992. He used 16 anesthetized dogs and injected 4 different dyes into these acupuncture points, which were again identified by these high electrical conductivity points. He used thallium chloride, iodine, sodium, rhenium sulfate, and then sodium pertectinate. And then he found 2 types of patterns. He found a star pattern and a linear trajectory pattern. Now, the star pattern is when they injected these dyes right into the skin, the dyes would just kind of stay there. And the patterns he found with this were in 3 of the 4 tracer dyes, and also when they injected the pertectinate in a control point. However, when he injected sodium pertectinate in the acupuncture points, that's where he found this linear trajectory that sort of matched with these meridians. And the migration was pretty slow. It went like 2.5 centimeters per minute. And he wanted to see this study wanted to see whether this was actually attributed to some known anatomical structure. Like, could it be the arteries or veins? And what he actually did was injected sodium pertectinate into the vein itself directly, and noticed that the path, basically the dye immediately disappeared. So it didn't have that slow migration that was seen at the acupuncture points. And the other thing was some of these studies injected in certain points that didn't follow the typical anatomic sort of vascular pathway. So for instance, when you inject in large intestine 18, normally the blood flow drainage goes sort of caudally down into the heart. But apparently the dye in some cases followed the meridian and went upwards. And the other example is of the liver meridian, where when they injected the dye there, it sort of migrated up directly as opposed to the venous, which goes sort of transversely. So this seems to indicate that it wasn't just through a vessel. And then they did some rhenium sulfate was chosen because it is used to go through the lymphatics, and they did not see the same pathway along the meridians when they use rhenium sulfate. And then the other thing is they wanted to see, was it actually going very superficially through the skin? And what the Kovacs did was, through the pathway that they found that they identified on the nuclear tracer dye, they took a skin flap, took it out, and tried to measure its radioactivity and didn't find anything. So basically, the pathway was some pathway that hasn't yet to be identified. It's not lymphatic, it's not vascular, and it's not superficially in the skin. So where is it going through? So we ended up doing a study. We went to, so CK knew a number of people in China. They were interested in sort of evaluating this, and I told them about these studies. And they had a brilliant idea of actually using fluorescent dyes as opposed to nuclear dyes. Now, the problem with nuclear dyes is when you use it, you're kind of stuck. You have to deal with all the radioactive safety issues. And so you have to, it's just a pain. The resolution is also very poor. And so what we ended up doing was we injected fluorescent and actually another dye on pericardium 6. And you could kind of see that it diffuses out like this, but then it migrates along this path, along the pericardium meridian. And the most surprising thing to me was that, particularly in this individual, you can't really see because the dye would sort of go deep. And it came out right here at pericardium 3. It like popped up. And these are the triangles that were sort of placed by an acupuncturist when they knew that this was going to be a pericardium point. It's called pericardium 3. So like case after case, when we saw this, I was like, holy smokes, we're onto something real here. And that, you know, it's like, it's following this path and then it's sort of merging out at these acupuncture points. And again, it had the same velocity, about a few centimeters per minute that they found with the nuclear tracer dyes. We use ICG dye, which is known to go along the lymphatics. And then when you trace it out, it actually doesn't follow the pericardium path that the fluorescent did. And then if anything, it sort of went a little off pericardium 3. It didn't emerge out like we saw in the fluorescent. And we also took a look using sort of this imaging mechanism to see the vasculature. And you could see sort of the fluorescent pathway here, and it doesn't concord with the veins there. So it wasn't venous, at least or even venous. And then we took a look, marked the path that we saw by the fluorescent dyes, and then took a look at the ultrasound. And so this is the metallic wire that we used as a demarcation. And we found that actually the path that the fluorescent dye took was between these two muscles and basically along the intermuscular fascia, which aligned well with what Alain Langevin had found, that these meridians were correlated in these fascial planes. So how do you interpret these results? How did I interpret the results? Basically from a chemical pathway point of view, the dyes that didn't coordinate, that correlate with meridians were different than the sodium pertectinate. So the pertectinate in general is more water soluble, it's hydrophilic, it's negatively charged, has low protein binding, and it's much smaller and more permeable. The same with fluorescent versus ICG. It's more water soluble, it's negatively charged, has low protein binding, and smaller in size. So basically, if it were positively charged, if it were bigger, if it were binding to albumin, it would sort of be sort of pathed into the lymphatics. But this one didn't. And so what's happening is there is some pathway that is in the fascia itself that correlates with some kind of interstitial fluid pathway that is within the intermuscular connective tissue that is sort of correlates with these acupuncture points and meridians. And this is become a hot area of research lately in terms of the interstitial tissues, because this is the area where the communication happens between the blood vessels and the adjacent tissues. So that's where a lot of the perfusion happens. A lot of the major nerves happen to travel through there. And we're finding some of the clinical findings that we get clinically, like for instance, endometriosis. In some cases, we see patients with endometriosis have endometrium go into the lung, and you could get something called catamenial pneumothorax. Anytime when you have menstrual periods, these patients have collapse of their lungs because that tissue starts to respond to the hormones. And we never understood why that's the case. But now there's some evidence to suggest that there's a whole interstitial pathway where things could pass by, and also cancers could pass through there. So this is a hot area of research. Now, I'm aware of time, so I'm going to try to go through this relatively quickly. What was really interesting is that there were some of these nuclear tracer dyes that shows that these pathways are electrically mediated. And so what this group did, Kovac, was basically along these meridian pathways where the nuclear tracer dye traveled, they took superficial cuts of the skin, and then along that pathway, and then when they did that, the migration stopped. And then when they did the same thing to the same meridian on the opposite side, the meridian migration also stopped. And so there's like this cross-body communication where somehow the injury on the left meridian is affecting the migration of the dye on the opposite side. And this is what Kovac said. The pertectinate migration only takes place when the radioactive tracer has been injected at points of low electrical resistance and in the presence of electrical insulation of the subcutaneous environment, whether by undamaged skin or insulating agents. This suggests that movement of the radioactive tracer dye may be related to the action of some force of electrical type by means of mechanism that might be similar to that of a capillary electrophoresis. And I wanted to quickly go through a study that was done by Mike Lovin here in Tufts. He took froglets, this is the right leg and left leg, immersed them in dieback dye, which basically allows to visualize electrical potential gradients in the epidermis. And what he did was he amputated the right limb, and then you could see at the area of entry, there's depolarization of the cells. But on the left side, you can see the depolarization happen, but it goes to basically the same length as what happens on the right. And he called this the bioelectrical injury mirroring. So the length of sort of the limb with respect to the amputation correlated with where the depolarization on the contralateral limb extended till. And then you could see that that relationship was linear. And he also did an interesting sort of study where he actually transected the nerves and then saw the same pattern. So it's not nerve mediated. So there's some kind of communicating system that's electrical, that's body-wide, and maybe that's what these acupuncturists are accessing in order to assess the clinical state of a patient. This is something that's a mechanism that I believe is happening that hasn't been evaluated. It's something called vascular streaming potentials. Blood vessels are lined with something called glycocalyx, which is highly negatively charged. You have counterions within plasma like sodium and calcium that goes with a blood flow, and you have something called streaming currents. And then this communicates with the interstitium, where you also have rich glycosaminoglycans, rich in negative ions and counter ions. And that sort of leads to this communication between blood flow and also the interstitium. And I don't have time to show these things, but basically there is a correlation with blood flow and then the electrical potential here that you see here. So you can see that there's increased blood flow, which correlates with increased electrical potential in 3 parts of the limb. And then the opposite when there's some kind of vascular constriction, and then you see the negative electrical potential there. This is a whole area that has yet to be explored. But again, this is where integrative medicine has sort of shown areas that medicine has not sort of discovered yet. And I think that is another pathway that we would hopefully discover. And this is sort of like this goes along with the bioelectrical X signal system that Monica was talking about. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, that was fascinating. If we're going to have to cut our discussion a little shorter, just because we're a little behind time, but if we can get all the speakers to join us. And I'd just like to say, listening to Andrew's work, but also to all the speakers, there's something that we're learning studying these sort of more fringe modalities. It's like studying rare diseases. Not only do you find answers to those rare diseases, but it opens up what I like to call collateral knowledge. And you can see that Helen's work with connective tissue led to these whole fields of research around the interstitium and the study of Chinese medicine and complexity and acupuncture is just opening up all these more fundamental questions. So lots to be learned when we overlay these maps. So I have a couple questions to start with, and then if there's some questions from the audience, please feel free to line up and join us. But again, just time to have a couple quick questions. But in this idea of overlap, and sort of maps from conventional biomedicine to traditional Chinese medicine, we've seen that things like complexity can predict things pretty well, right? You see things that you would see with these complex measures that you wouldn't see with conventional averages or linear processes. I know from working collaboratively with this group that measuring complexity, even though we see all these pretty curves, complexity index, that it's not for the faint at heart. that there's a lot of decisions that need to be made to make, to quantify these things. So I asked maybe CK first and others, where are we in the ability to almost automate these processes? Because I've seen from, for example, work with IV and others that you've got to clean up the heart rate data, look for ectopic beats. There are decisions to make about what scales you use and which parameters. And each one of those is quite sensitive and can give you different answers. So how close are we to having someone lay in a bed in the ICU and have real-time complexity measures that you can use to triage their care?
Hello? Yes, that's a good question. Actually, to clean up your data is very a lot of work, and most data that collect in the clinical setting is really very messy. So one possibility that we are pursuing right now is actually using AI, trying to let the processing become more automated instead of human labor driven. And but that depends on the amount of database you have. You have to really have a really large database. And so we are collecting, for example, for ICU data, continuous heart rate, we need to collect significant much more data than what we have right now. So I think in the near future, there should be, your dream will come true. So without any expert, so all of us will be eliminated by the AI. I think that's possible, Jenny.
Good. I have a thought. Oh, were you going to say something, Ivy?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. So in addition to like the cleaning process, like at the very beginning, the first place, I was asked very often by other researchers, we would like to apply some complexity analysis. What kind of data should we get? So I always encourage people to run tests before they start clinical data collection or design the clinical trial. So for example, as CK mentioned, that complexity is a tool, is a good technique that can apply to many kinds of data. But what data do you want? Do you want heart rate data, EEG data, muscle data, or we also have experience like acoustic data from simple recording from the voice, like all kinds of data that we can apply complexity analysis. But the question is how we collect the data. So before we jump into like cleaning after the data collection, we want to know, for example, how long do you collect the data? Is the sampling rate good enough to see the information hidden in the physiological signals? So a lot of, especially like wearable devices, for example, the output, the data that we receive that has already been precised or averaged. So we already lose the hidden information in the dynamic pattern. So that will be a problem, no matter how AI is smart or how we clean the data eventually in the analysis, we already lose the data. So a general suggestion I would give is that always test, always run the data before you conduct clinical data collection or research to see eventually if we collect such kind of data in such time duration, would that be good enough to see the complexity that you want to see at the end? So that's my general suggestion.
And that we're not going to answer this now, but it always makes me wonder because, and Andrew talked about this sort of holographic principle that the whole is reflected in the parts. And part of why we think signals are complex is because of this crosstalk between different systems. So one would think that EEG, EKG, COP, WTF, whatever system you're looking at, pardon me, would give you the same level of complexity, but we're not seeing that. So I think it's an interesting question as where you interrogate the system to get a measure of the whole. And it doesn't seem to be perfectly holographic. But we can have that discussion over beer later. But I want to make sure we have some time for some audience questions. So I'll start here, and then I think Amy has a question as well.
Thank you very much. Very honored to be here. I came all the way from Hong Kong to be here, a graduate of the Harvard School of Public Health. So I'm a lawyer by training, but I try to learn Chinese medicine by doing acupuncture myself. And the question I ask is, how do you integrate Chinese and Western medicine and these kinds of traditional and non-traditional medicine holistically and sustainably in the future? Thank you very much.
Yes, a very good question. So it's tough. So to integrate Chinese medicine and Western medicine, usually when we learn both Chinese medicine and Western medicine in China, we learn both knowledge, both theory, and both practicing. So today's China, the popular way to integrate Chinese medicine and Western medicine is use the both diagnosis and apply the both treatment. that is the popular way choose in China. That means for example, I am the licensed physician in China. I have the physician license in China. I practice Chinese medicine and Western medicine together. I can practice the orthopedic surgery for my patient, and also I practice the acupuncture and the chiropractic treatment for patient. So all of my patients receive two diagnoses. One is the Chinese medicine diagnosis, one is a Western medicine diagnosis, and all the treatment plan incorporate both of them. And then this is I think the model today we are using in China, but a lot of people question this because we all know the philosophy is different. One is the reductionism, one is the holism, the systematic. So my personal idea is I don't care we support which one we support, but I care the clinical efficacy. That means the benefit the patient can benefit from. So I prefer to help the patient with the best solution, best the plan. So for example, I practice orthopedics. So if the patient just has the pain issue, the chronic pain issue, I prefer to do the acupuncture first. And also if the patient has some systematic issue like I mentioned, pain issue with the blood pressure, I give the herbal medicine together. And also, if the patient has the severe issue like the bone fracture, we can do the non-surgical, we can do hand manipulation reduction for the bone fracture. So that's a non-surgical way. But if the fracture is severe enough, very severe, we need a surgery, we do surgery. So there's no fixed solution, fixed plan for the patient. We do acupuncture only, or we do the Western medicine only. So I think the solution based on which one is the best for the patient. This is today's the solution. But in the future, I think because Dr. Peng always said, I learned from Dr. Peng 10 years ago. Dr. Peng said, so a science, if the science or if a field which lacked the quantification, that means which lacked the biomarker, is not the real science. We need a number. We need a measurable number for each side of each type of the science. Like the physics, we need to measure the velocity. We need to measure the pressure. We need to measure everything, the size, the length and height, and all the sides. We need a number. But for Chinese medicine, the problem is we don't have number. So everything depends on the doctor's feeling, like the pulse. So it's hard to name the pulse between the different practitioners. This guy named the pulse thin, that guy named the pulse slippery. So it is hard to standardize all of them. I think the future is we need to develop some tools or develop some measurable the biomarkers which can quantify the Chinese medicine terms, not the Western medicine terms, but Chinese medicine. For example, what is the number for yin? What is the number for yang? What's the number for blood? What's the number for qi? So that is in the future, we need to develop this. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew, keep it brief, and then we're going to have to wrap it up.
No, to answer that question, I as a practicing physician, I do it terribly. I can't integrate the two, and a lot of it has to just do with the practical state of things. You know, when we're in the hospital taking care of patients, you don't have the time to do like the thorough assessments that acupuncturists sort of need to do. You also aren't getting reimbursed for it. So, you know, you know, there, and it's just the paradigmatically, it's just so different. You know, each person sort of needs a very thorough evaluation. Not like it's easy to sort of say for hypertension, you take a look at the values and then you say, all right, this patient needs this medication. It's very hard to do in the real life. So if you have some ideas, please let me know.
I would just say that not only is there the clinical piece of this bridging, very good question, but even just a simple research piece, and it doesn't have to be within one domain or the other. For example, if Dr. Fon had some diagnosis of liver fire versus phlegm and dampness based on the treatment of, you know, based on the nosology of traditional Chinese medicine, wouldn't it be really interesting to include that in a drug trial for hypertension? For example, you know, maybe there, you know, we know in Chinese medicine that hypertension is not just one thing. You can have hypertension for a lot of reasons. So perhaps the liver fire people will do better with a beta blocker, and the phlegm and dampness people will do better with a diuretic or an ACE inhibitor. Those sorts of bridges to look at the value and the unique diagnostic features of these different traditions have yet to be really explored.